everyone. I hope you guys can hear me. So today we're talking about serverless with Azure and what that. So we're going into in depth about what that means and how you can bring that into business or try to implement those bring the concept of serverless, right? Sorry, serverless serverless technologies into apps that you're building, your future apps and whatnot. So we're going to talking about what serverless is, why you should consider going serverless, function apps, what they are, and probably and some drawbacks or possibly a demo on how basically you would implement serverless. You add serverless into most of what you are into most of the technologies you'll be utilizing to build some of your flagship products or whatnot. Basically, we'll be talking about what serverless is. Okay, we'll be talking about what serverless is. And probably most of us on the call are already familiar with the buzzword serverless. Does it mean not using servers? Does it mean that all of a sudden servers don't exist anymore? As most of us know, serverless servers are the basic infrastructure for most of the internet we have today. We're able to communicate with one another on the internet because the web page or Facebook is hosted on someone's server, and then you can communicate from there, or you can upload your blog to another person's server or host your website on someone else's server. So it's basically the internet is basically just a net of interwoven servers communicating with one another. So serverless doesn't mean that we are going to do away with servers all of a sudden, because the servers are a necessary component for most of modern life as we know it. So what does then serverless mean, right? With the advent of cloud computing, most of what we have come to see that we can now host virtual machines on the internet or on somebody else's server as would be, and then host our websites or web applications there, which have the basis of it being on another person's servers, which might be faster than our own computers. So basically now there's another step ahead of that, because when you're talking about VMs, you're talking about having a platform as a service, right? So you have somebody spin up a virtual machine for you, and then you can run up any application. You can deploy any application. You can even use the virtual machine as you would use your own computer. So and another level comes up above that, which we know as, or which you might have heard, is called app service, where you then have all of that encapsulated as you just pushing up applications, grouping all the applications, databases as into one service. Then another level of that is where we talk about serverless. Now, what serverless is just a cloud computing model, basically, which cloud providers allows us to run more or less functions on the server. So most of the business processes or most of the functionalities that we make up into applications or full-blown applications can just be like one single functions that are hosted on a server somewhere. Probably something we call sparingly. We don't call it that often. There are functions or there are functionalities that they are just one-time calls. Let's look at a wild case would be most of us are having somewhat of a hello world kind of application, and that we encapsulate with a whole app service, because you could separate those large applications into different functions, and then have probably your clients or your users call those functions whenever they need it, right? So one other thing about going serverless or the serverless technology is that they are event based. So probably a call has to be made, right? An HTTP call, right? Or somebody has to send a request from your mobile phone, right? To trigger out your function to do A and B. or is it when something is added to your database? Or and how do we know that something is added to your database? We have a probably there's a form online you want your consumers to fill, and yes, some of these things can be done if you probably heard of Power Apps, right? So in Azure, then there's a new level, right? You have your Power Automate, which is a design first approach where you pick up, you pull boxes, you pull certain boxes which are signified as actions and triggers. In the same concept, you have like one trigger, so something triggers your flow, and your flow then executes a set of actions. Now, when you go down to creating serverless functions, then you are now becoming more developer specific. You are trying to make it more technical. So what happens there is, instead of so you could have also triggers in this case, but what if your triggers are more complicated than can be done with Power Automate in this case? Because Power Automate just provides you like a set of triggers. So maybe you want to have a trigger when somebody fills a form online, and that sends an initiative request to the function app that you have up. And then what that does is then you execute some set of functions, right? And some of the things you can make or encapsulate as function apps or as into serverless compute is something that some of those functionalities that don't take so much time to execute, and they are better implemented just as a single, in this case, as functions somewhere else, because one, you don't call it too often, and they're best event based. So basically, like it's defined in the slide, it's just a cloud computing execution model in which we have our cloud providers run the server. They also dynamically manage the allocation. So when you have an app service, you are the one who is managing the resources, managing what DB you are going to call, what architecture you're going to use. So all that is going to be managed by the server itself. So you don't really need to bother yourself much when you go serverless. Now, like I spoke earlier, I said there's some there are some options available to you on the cloud when you're trying to public host up an application, your company application, and you have virtual machines. An example, you can spin up a virtual machine, and that would have you able to host the server you need to expose. You need to host. You need to show. You allow you to spin up a server, spin up a web page or something, and then from the virtual machine serve up the web page. But that cost, that's extra cost, because you have to pay for every moment that virtual machine is on, right? And what if you just have a small function? Then that is more or less waste of cost, right? Waste of money on a virtual machine. Then we have app services, another one, and as well could also be a waste if the whatever you're hosting is something that you could split into separate functions or function apps in the case of Azure, and have each of those function app serve up, maybe respond to certain events, right? So you might not need to actually spin up a whole app service, which might be an extra cost, right? And then we have serverless, which we are talking about today. So these are the options available to you on the cloud. And the former two, that is virtual machines and app services, get spoken about a lot, and I'm pretty sure, and serverless not so much. So that's why the exposure to what serverless is also very important. So how does Azure approach serverless? Azure provides you different ways to create serverless kinds of or serverless or create a serverless architecture, basically. So we have Azure Logic Apps, right? So Azure Logic Apps are basically like your Power Automate, right? You have those. It's a design first approach. You have the drag and drop feature, and you have, like in your Power Automate, as in even in Azure Functions, you have one trigger and you have several steps of actions that you want to perform when that flow or that logic app is triggered. So then we have Azure Functions, which we'll talk about, which is basically is the serverless application platform also on Azure, which allow your developers to be able to host business logic that can be executed without provisioning the infrastructure. Like I pointed out before, before you can utilize certain things like app services or VMs, you also have to make sure you are also looking to control the infrastructure. What does the how does the database, where will you deploy the database, where will you do this? But you don't have to care so much about all that separate functionality, all that infrastructure when you're talking about logic apps, because the Azure Functions, Azure Functions would help you handle all those separate parts like scaling and all those separate functionalities that are very common to people who are trying to build applications online. So now we have an in-depth go at Azure Logic Apps. Is that Azure Logic Apps are design first. They have a design first approach. So like I pointed out, they are more like Power Automate, where you have it's more or less a drag and drop system, right? You can have complex workflows that are drawn out to model like a business process. They also provide you like 200 plus connectors with possibility of a custom connector, and they are targeted at IT pros, not and also developers, because they provide you the ability to probably edit your workflow with JSON. So more or less like an operation that a developer would go by doing. But then you have on the other side, which is Azure Logic Apps, basically allows you to run a piece of code, without worrying about, like I pointed out, infrastructure. And one other thing is, it's more or less based on a pay as you use consumption plan. So anytime your consumers or your clients make a request to your server, then at that point, as long as the period in which that function app is running, you pay for that period of time. Whatever downtime it has, you don't pay for that period of time. And then automatic scaling. So as your consumers or the users that are making requests, so as they increase in number, the function tends to scale proportion to that, and also match the match requests that are coming to it daily. So, and also it's also targeted at developers, so you can have your developers write in any language. So I think the ones that supported that we have C#, Node.js, Python, and I think Java. I'm not too sure about that, but just those languages. So basically that is all about serverless, right? How Azure approaches serverless technologies, right? So the question now becomes, why should you consider going serverless? So we have the benefit of automatic scaling. So like I pointed out, you have your user base growing, right? They are making more calls to your functions. That what the function app allows you to do is that it allows you to scale automatically, right? It allows you to increase, so grow in response to the number of users that are making requests to it, right? So now you don't have the case of overallocation of infrastructure. So like I pointed out with your app services, not that your app services are bad, but if you have an app service you spin up just to, for example, return what the daily weather is, or what the forecast is for the day, it might be totally useless, because it might be totally useless in the when you're looking at cost and probably infrastructure. You are probably wasting some, because it might not really need to, maybe needs to save to a DB, but that's something you could also do with a function app, right? And not everybody's going to, or your users might not be going to your web page to be getting the current weather every day, right? So you might just be wasting infrastructure, and you are paying for those things as the time goes, even though you disable those app services. Now, they are also event driven. So like I pointed out, there are different triggers that you can apply when it comes to your function app. You can use your HTTP triggers. You can use your you can even trigger from a Cosmos from when your user, or when your user save to a DB. So you can trigger. There are different ways in which you can trigger your function app to start up a process, to do one or two things, and probably return a response to your users. And if you are tired of using the serverless architecture, you can always move it back to like a traditional compiler that is being the way you probably hosted it before. All you have to do is just take that piece of code and put it back into into more or less like a coding environment that you're familiar with. And one other advantage of it would be that you spend more time focusing on your business logic, because you don't have to focus on, okay, how are we going to spin up, how are we going to set up this to work with this. We don't have to focus on the infrastructure. You can just focus on what the business logic is, what process, or what, how do you want to get from here to here, and how is that convenient for the business logic, basically. So that's basically the benefits of going serverless. Now, we're going to talk about next is function apps and what they basically are. And the way Azure implements serverless architecture is with function apps. It's basically the it's the context, it's the execution context for serverless, or is the encapsulation of what serverless architecture in Azure, right? So let me. Okay. So it's the it's the encapsulation of um, of serverless architecture on Azure, and how when you're trying to create a function app, you would have there are some prerequisites, which include you would have to choose a service plan, and that service plan can either be a consortium service plan, which I've said, which allows you to be charged as you go, basically, as your users are making requests to it, right? So and also as long as it's online, or as long as it's accessible. So that is the consumption service plan. Then you also have the Azure App Service Plan, which now the problem with the consumption service plan is that you have the issue of hello? Okay, you have the issue of your your function apps have like a timeout period of about, like, by default it's 5 minutes, but it can go up to 10 minutes. So if you have like longer processes, right, that you want to execute, probably you want to separate a certain process into function function apps, right? And but you have this process that would execute for a very long time, probably is calling a third-party service, probably is communicating with a very slow database, or is communicating with a resource that's going to take a long time to respond, or you have just a complex mathematical operation that you want to execute that's going to take forever or take a very long time. You might want to now start considering moving away from the consumption service plan, start looking at the Azure App Service Plan. But that one will cost you more when compared to the consumption service plan. And one of the things is, when you're trying to create a function app, you must ensure that it's linked up with it's linked up with a it's linked up with an app service, with a storage account. So what that storage account allows you to do is store your config files, store your store probably your log files, and also maybe store your probably you want to persist some data, right? You can also do that with your with the storage account. So everything seems to be checked out if you want to basically implement a function. Like I pointed out, function app is just the way in which Azure allows you to encapsulate serverless. So we'll start a small demo on how you can create function apps, basically create small serverless applications. So let me go ahead to do that. Sorry.
All right. So while Mr. Barsi is trying to set up for the demo session, I hope you are enjoying the session so far. If you have any question, with what we've learned so far, do kindly make use of the chat box and please drop your questions. I'm very, very sure that your questions will be well attended to. Thank you so very much.
Okay, back. So what we're going to do is create a small function app. So basically, you first have to create a resource. So you just come here and search for create resource. Yeah, an option somewhere. So then all you can do is come to compute and click on function app. Now, after you've chosen your subscription, you can then choose the resource group that you want to use and probably put a name to the function app. So go with demo app. Okay, I think that has been taken. So we can try this one. And now, in this case, I'm going to be coding with Node.js, so do Node.js and all this. So really nothing much to do here. So unless you have some certifications you want to put yourself, but there's really nothing. As you can see, I pointed out that a storage account is also necessary for you to create a function app. So that's why this by default will create a storage account for you. So we can go create, review and create, then create it. So this might take a while. So we have to wait for this to be deployed. Okay, should be done anytime soon. Okay, so let's go to the resource. Now, this is basically what happens when after you've gone through those processes. You can also view it, the function app somewhere. So right now, it's just going to be like the default Azure Functions page, right? Because nothing is there yet. So what we can do to add functions, so probably you have your large application and you want to split those different functionalities. Probably it's costing you to host it on app service and you want to split it into different functionality, which you can have probably front end, query it and serve your users. So this is where you would come, right? You come over to this function here and then you just all you have to just create one. So in this case, we are going to be using an HTTP trigger, but there are a lot of triggers you can use, as you would see. There's the trigger, a time trigger. Probably you want something that will be triggered every midnight, right? Or a certain period of time. You can use the timer trigger. You can use the Azure queue, and they're pretty much a lot more. So in this case, we're going to use HTTP trigger, and okay. What's this coming up? Okay. So we can go here and then create. Yes. So now when we do this, we have the options of creating coding on the web, or we can also code maybe with our favorite code editor. But if we don't have one and we want to code on the web, we can go here, just do code plus test here. And so let me bring one other thing here so we can make requests to it. Taking a while to spin up that guy. Okay. Okay. This again. This. It's taking a while to spin up. Let's see. Do this again. Taking a while. Okay. Yeah. This guy. Okay. Okay. It's taking a while to show up. Oh, so while that is still taking time to come up, I can go ahead to talk about what the drawbacks of using serverless would be. So the drawbacks would be, like I pointed out earlier, um, would be the fact that there's timeouts. There's some timeouts. associated with it. So you can't run something that goes beyond, like, if you have like a piece of functionality that goes for more than 5 minutes or 10 minutes, it might be best for you to run that thing in a VM, right? Because what will happen is that execution or that process will be cut short, right? And when you're having HTTP requests, there's an additional, there's a further restriction of that timeout to 2.5 minutes. So, but there are other options on the table if you still want to consider serverless, which is durable functions. So, and then we have another problem with it, another drawback, which would be the execution frequency. Like, if you expect like your functions to be executed continually by multiple clients, the cost of that might be more expensive than if you just run that functionality in a VM. So let's also, so that's basically the two drawbacks you might be having. But in other cases, you might want to just be considering using a serverless architecture to host most of your maybe your app functionality, especially if those functionalities are not something that that are going to take a long period of time. And I'm pretty sure most of the functionalities you have in the applications you have live are not something that take hours or not something that's so complex that you need that whole app service or a VM to host those things. So let's check back on Azure to see if that is loading. But if you do have any questions, you can go ahead and ask while I try to figure this out. Hello? Okay, so I think we are up here. Let me see this. Hello? If you do have any questions, you could go ahead to ask if there are any. While this is trying to go.
Sorry, Mr. Basti, sorry to cut in. You don't know who is saying hello, but you can, of course, make use of the chat box to drop your question if you have any. Thank you so much. I don't think Azure wants to take, if there are any questions. If not, that's basically the end of the presentation, unless Azure comes up. Sorry, Mr. Basti, can you please speak up a little bit? So we can hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now? So
Yeah.
so I'm pointing out that Azure doesn't want me to demo this. It's been loading here forever. So, but regardless, that will be the end of the presentation unless Azure does come up. And if there are any questions, I'll take them.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you so much for this very beautiful and insightful session. Thank you for telling us about going serverless with Azure. I believe our guests on the call and also everyone from Ha-Shem that is on this call have learned a lot from the session, and then it is really helpful to everyone. Let us take questions if there are any. If you have a question, please kindly use the raise hand feature. Please kindly raise your hand and I'll be calling you to ask your question. And if you like to, of course, drop your question in the chat box, you are free to do that as well. Okay, well, it appears as if there are no questions, but while we are still waiting, let me remind you that if you want a customized demo, because of our time, we are looking at the time, and that is why we, ended this session. But if you want a customized demo, if you want us to schedule a demo with you, of course, you can reach out to us at marketing@hashemlimited.com. If you would also love to request the code, you can always reach out to us at sales@hashemlimited.com. Kindly remember to also fill the evaluation form. It is important. If you want to request a quote or you want to request for anything, of course, you can make use of the evaluation form. You can, of course, drop your comments or any of the inquiry. We would, of course, reach out to you. Also, I believe Michael has sent in the social media links. Please kindly do ensure to follow us across all social media platforms. We are sending out very enriching information, updating you about latest technology and how digital transformation is going about in all over the world. Do kindly follow us, and also I want to tell you that the webinar recording will be available on our YouTube platform. Please, we would like that you go ahead, visit our YouTube channel, and of course, please subscribe. So once again, I'll be asking, is there any question? So that we can take your question now. Yeah.